Today I'm going to be showing you how to make elderberry syrup. It's a great cold and flu remedy that is very easy to make at home. You only need a few ingredients and it's very high in vitamin C and antioxidants. Now I've got some elderberries here that were harvested as part of a hidden orchard harvest a few weeks ago. They've been in my freezer, and even if you're going to make this syrup from fresh berries, I would recommend you put them in the freezer just for a few hours because it's actually easier to take them off the stems this way. It's really important to get the berries off the stems because the stems are poisonous, and it's really important to note that you shouldn't be eating raw elderberries at all because they are poisonous. So you need to cook them, and you basically just want to pull them off the stem, leaving the stem and throwing that away. So this process takes a little while. It's a little bit labor intensive. The rest of the recipe is really easy. And I do find it easier to pull them off the stems when they're frozen. It doesn't matter too much if you get some stem in there because we are cooking it for quite a while and we just want to get the bulk of the stems out of there. This part does take ages and your hands get quite cold when they're frozen, so you might want to wear gloves. Or this might be an activity that you want to get your kids involved in. I'm going to make quite a big batch of syrup today. You don't need to make a batch this big. You can make a batch with just about a cup of these berries, which will obviously be a lot faster. You're going to get involved, Sam?
Oh, there we go.
They're quite cold because they've been frozen. Shall I introduce you?
I'm Sam.
Hi, Sam.
I am a friend of Alan's. But there's stems in there.
Yeah, little bits of stems is okay like that. We just want to get all the big bits out.
But because we're cooking them, the stems won't be poisonous anymore either.
Yeah, no, it's fine. You just don't want too many of them in there.
Because they'll just taste a bit.
I do know of some people that I've spoken to that just put the whole of these...
Just chuck the whole thing in?
Yeah,
wow.
Of these stems. And they said they've been eating this syrup for years and with no adverse side effects. But
not that they can tell.
Well, yes. They haven't died yet. But just to be on the safe side, we'll take most of the stems out. So the other really popular thing to make from an elderberry tree is the elderflower cordial, which is using the white flowers before they turn into berries.
Yeah. Super popular at the moment.
Yeah, there's a lot of people around Ballarat that make that, so it's actually reasonably rare to get them turning into berries because people cut all the flowers off
before you can get the berries.
Yeah, so elderflower syrup has similar health benefits, but you don't have to go through and pick all the berries off like this, so it's a little bit easier to make, which is why people tend to go for that. I personally like the elderberry syrup more. The elderflower cordial is quite floral. Obviously, whereas this is,
I feel like for different seasons as well, this would be good for the colder months, which I guess Ballarat has a lot more of.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the sort of elderflower would be more of a summery drink by the pool kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's really handy because that's how the seasons work out. So elderflowers are ripe in November.
Yeah.
So ready to make the syrup before summer, and elderberries are ripe.
Like now-ish.
Yeah, now-ish, January, February. So really good to make a batch and leave it for a little while before cold and flu season sets in. Sometimes when you break them apart like this, a lot of them just come loose. I decided not to take any of this fruit to any of our charities.
Yeah.
Just in case people didn't know what it was or how to deal with it.
It could be potentially dangerous.
Yeah, didn't want to be taking it to Food is Free or something when, kids go down that laneway and might just see them as berries. And
especially if you're saying to people, oh, these are elderberries, they'll be like, oh, great, I can just chomp on these.
Yeah, you'd want to put a big warning sign on them saying, do not eat these raw. When you're picking the elderberries, you also want to make sure that there's not too many of the green berries in there because they do have higher levels of the toxin. So a few are okay, but you really want to be making sure that the really dark black ones are the ones that you're harvesting. Awesome. Now that the elderberries are separated from the stems, we can measure how many cups we've got there into the pan. So we've got about 8 cups of elderberries. That's quite a big batch. You only really need about 1.5 cups to make a batch. So I'm going to put equal amounts of water in here. So about 8 cups of water. So you want just enough water in there to cover the elderberries basically. We're going to be boiling those, and as they boil, we can crush it with a potato masher to really release all of the juices out of the berries. You can make a really simple syrup with just the elderberries, water, and either sugar or honey. I'm going to be putting some spices in mine today. So I've got 2 cinnamon sticks, about 2 teaspoons of cloves, and about 2 tablespoons of ginger powder. Ideally, you would use fresh ginger for this, but I didn't have any, so I'm just using powder today. Today I'm using sugar in this recipe. Ideally for added health benefits, you could use some raw local honey. If you are using honey, don't add it before cooking it because you want to keep it raw for the full health benefits. So you actually want to add it at the end of the recipe. Today I'm just using sugar. So we've got 8 cups of fresh or frozen elderberries, 8 cups of water. I'm going to put 2 cups of sugar in this. So I'll put that in now. Because it's sugar, if you're putting honey, put it at the end. And now we want to simmer this for about an hour. As it's simmering, we just want to make sure it's all stirred in, and you can start pressing down on the berries with a potato masher just to release their juices. I have seen recipes where people use a stick blender for this, but you want to avoid breaking up the seeds inside the berries because they can make the recipe quite bitter. So potato masher will be great, and at the end, after it's simmered for an hour, we will strain this through a fine sieve or some cheesecloth, ideally if you have it. And that will separate all of the solids from the berries and also take out our cloves and cinnamon sticks that are in there as well. Once the syrup has been boiling for about an hour, it should be ready to put in jars. The way that I like to sterilize my jars is if you just put them in a sink full of boiling hot water. I don't worry too much about drying the water off them because it will evaporate. That also warms up the containers so that they're not being shocked when you're putting the warm liquid into them. They're not going to break. You do want to cool the syrup down slightly before you put it in the jars, and if you're adding honey rather than sugar, you want to cool the mixture down and then stir the honey in so that you don't cook out the honey. As you can see, the syrup has reduced probably about 2 centimeters down. You can reduce it further if you want a really thick syrupy consistency. I don't mind it being quite runny because I tend to have it by itself. You want to use the potato masher to make sure you've got all of the juice out of the berries. And then when it's ready to go, you'll need a funnel and some cheesecloth, or if you have a really fine sieve, that will probably work. Or if you don't have cheesecloth, you can use a tea towel as well. It will just drain a lot slower. When you've squeezed all the juice out of the berries, you can just add that to the stems from before and put them all in your green bin. If you're using something with a plastic lid, you just got to remember that there won't be a proper seal, so these will last not as long as if you're actually properly canning them or putting them in a jar. But because I've used sugar in this recipe instead of honey, that will actually extend the shelf life. If you're using honey and putting it in a plastic lid, you might want to drink it a bit quicker, but really this should last a fair few months. And if you're worried about the shelf life, you can keep the berries just frozen as berries in your freezer and then make a batch of syrup whenever you'd like. If you wanted to make sure you had some over winter, or if you use sugar and can it properly using metal lid jars or bottles, it should last a really long time, probably about 6 months.
If you don't need it all before then.
If you don't drink it all before then. I'm making a really big batch today as well, so you won't necessarily be making a batch this big and be worried about shelf life. If you're just making a small batch, you may go through it pretty quickly. So it just depends how much you want and how long you want it to last. If you're letting the mix cool down a little bit, you can usually use your fingers to squeeze this out, but it's pretty hot still. So I'm using a wooden spoon. And a reminder that if you're using honey instead of sugar, you want to let it cool down before adding the honey. So that's the recipe for elderberry syrup. Feel free to play around with it. You can add different flavorings if you want. I've seen people add lemon juice, or maybe you're not such a fan of clove or ginger or cinnamon. Those are all totally optional. The basic recipe is elderberries, water, and either honey or sugar. It's really high in antioxidants, really high in vitamin C. It's a great cold and flu remedy that you can make at home.